give a big round of applause for Peyton Leone.
The year was 2003. I was 11 years old, and my brothers and I were super excited to finally see The Matrix Reloaded. Now, 11 is a little young for a rated R movie, but I had already seen the first Matrix movie, and save for a couple scenes of body horror, it's mostly just a bunch of shooties and punchies, not a big deal. Which is why it was weird when in the middle of the movie, Neo and Trinity start having sex in the middle of the candlelit underground drum rave, which is a real thing that happens in that movie. Now, growing up, especially at that age, I was very uncomfortable with sex. And my dad learned very early on that if he ever wanted to provoke a response from me or my brothers, that would be his way to do it. So, sensing the tension in the room, my dad decides to defuse the situation with this. Yeah, when they film scenes like this, they put this little cloth tube on the guy to prevent their junk from touching. They call it the old cock sock. But Trinity's really hot, so I feel like I would run into the problem where I would keep popping it off. That really helps the situation. Imagining my dad dry humping a movie star with what I imagine is a little cognac bottle hanging from his dick. But my dad, he wasn't a one-trick pony. He was no novice. He was an artist. And so he would be able to find any situation and be able to make it either awkward or sexual. He was kind of like If That's What She Said was a person. So 1 year later, I'm 12 years old, and he's driving me to a Taekwondo lesson. And at that age especially, I had problems really relating with him, so I sat quiet in the entire trip. And so it's not until we're pulling into the driveway that he decides to finally break the ice with, "Hey, so your mom tells me that you're interested in a girl in school. That's cool. Just be careful about redheads, son. They gave me the clap twice." And then he just sent me off into the world. It was like the parental equivalent of just cutting a fart and then walking out of the room. This is all important because when I was 17 years old, I got a virus on my computer. We all know what I got it from. It was from porn. I was nervous to ask my dad for help because, it was really hard to ask your parents for help for anything. But I asked him, and in about 30 minutes, he came into the den and he started fixing the computer. Now, I had expected him to just sort of wipe it clean, and I was cool with that. Start over fresh, get rid of the evidence, move on from this a better person. But my dad managed to fix it without having to wipe it clean, and for me, that was a cool bonus. I didn't have to re-download anything or find any of my sweet porn again. But my dad isn't a person to just leave something unfinished. He's very thorough, and he is not gonna come back to something if he doesn't have to. So he opens up Firefox, and he starts heading to the little drop-down menu. Now, for those of you who aren't really familiar with web browsers, up next to the search bar, there's a little drop-down menu that has, the websites that you go to. And for someone who is organized or has a little restraint. It's a very nice tool to very easily and quickly access the websites that you go to on a regular basis. For a dumb, horny teenager, it was an indictment of everything that I jerked off to daily. And my dad was headed right towards it. Time slowed down. It was like that scene in the horror movie where you're just laying in bed and the doorknob just sort of starts like going up and down and you're laying there and you're like, oh no. Nothing good is gonna happen after this. And I don't really know what I was afraid of because as we have established, my dad is a very sexual creature. But you never really know how your parents are going to respond to MILF Central or Bukkake Nation. So my dad clicks the little drop-down menu, and he clicks one of the websites, and of course it's porn. But it was just a little image forum, you know, with a couple of pictures of porn stars and naked women. And he sort of just scrolls through it, and then he closes the window, gets up and leaves without saying anything. That's scary. Because my dad always says a thing. And so I just sort of wait there because we're gonna have to talk about this. And so 5 minutes goes by, then 10, then 15. It's not until almost 20 minutes later that I hear him call me. Hey, bud, why don't you come into the living room real quick? Sweet, this is it. This is where we're gonna have that talk. And I get up and I walk out into the living room. But immediately, there's some red flags. My dad is sitting at his computer desk, which separates the living room from the dining room. That's weird. Kind of seems like if you wanted to have this conversation, you would sit at any of the two couches that we have, but maybe this is just like a comfort zone thing for him. But then I noticed there's a second chair pulled up next to him. That's kind of weird, right? But I guess it's so we could have this talk next to each other in his comfort zone. And he motions at the chair, and he's like, hey, pal, why don't you take a seat there? Well, the way he says it, it's not like, hey, man, you've had a really long day. Why don't you take a load off? No, the way he says it, it's like kind of one of those questions that ends in a period because it's not really actually a question. And so I comply, and I sit down, and I brace myself for this conversation. But instead of talking, he turns back to his computer, and he scrolls his mouse over to this little folder he's had minimized this whole time. And he clicks it open. And what do I see in it but his pornography? And it is just ass after ass after ass after ass. Because as I found out, my dad was an ass man. Right? Yeah, I know, right? It's crazy. And so he starts scrolling through this very large folder, and he'll make little comments like, oh, why don't you look at the legs on that one? Or, ooh, doesn't her ass look good? And I'm getting really uncomfortable. Just super uncomfortable. It feels like time has just stopped, and I'm just gonna have to sit there for the rest of my life looking at ass after ass with my dad until the sun burns out. And finally, just when I think it can't get any worse, he gets to a picture and he turns to me and he says, "Man, her ass is so thick, I just want to bite down on it so hard that I get lockjaw." Yeah, that was it for me too. That really pushed me over the ledge. I was so uncomfortable at that point. I was literally squirming in my chair. And so my dad noticed, that he had sort of maybe pushed it a little bit too far, maybe stepped over a line. And he turns to me and he says, "All right, you've been tortured enough. You can go." And so I get up and I walk right back into the den and I sit back down at the computer desk and really try to process what just happened to me. It was crazy. It really fucked me up why he would do that. I felt so uncomfortable with that I couldn't even look at porn for 6 whole hours. So 5 years ago, my dad died of cancer. This is a good pivot. And although we never really saw eye to eye on everything, he was still, in his way, always there for me. And losing him and that absence that created had a sort of weight to it. And that weight really forces you to recontextualize your relationship with that person. And so it's kind of weird now to me that years ago, a memory that I was absolutely embarrassed of, that I was horrified with, that I would have at the time given anything to forget, is now one of my favorite memories of my dad. Because I think in his own really weird, really messed up way, he was just trying to bond with me. No. But still. And so I always find myself thinking back to that moment, knowing what I do now, what would I do different? What would I say? And I think I would look at him and I would say, "Dad, frankly, I'm not really an ass man." Thank you so much.